It puts out a little blast to all the people that follow.
Hey, welcome to On the Chain, the HODL review. This is Jeff here with special guest Nick Black. Welcome, welcome, Nick. It's great to have you here on the HODL review. We had a great roundtable last weekend, I think it was, and man, there's so much going on since we last spoke. It's absolutely insane. Yes, yeah, that's it's crazy. Oh, I can't believe it. I'm really, oh no, oh shoot. You know what? Sorry about that. Nick, no sound from you. Sorry, I muted Nick by mistake. Uh, Nick, back to you.
I was just gonna say, for those that followed the last time we got together, we had talked about the Fed bank accounts, essentially Fed accounts, so that they could do real time stimulus. And it looks like this may not go through on the first try, but they're kind of nipping at the heels of this idea, and I think they may have floated the idea and fought for it simply to get the idea out there, so that people are talking about it, and it's a little bit more calming when they do introduce it.
Yeah, yeah. So here's what's crazy. All right, so I pulled up a number of articles, and I think that we got so much crazy stuff going on. So before we get into this digital dollar concept, there's so much movement, with the turmoil going on. So we see the government, inner workings at play, during this period of time when everything is in crisis mode, yet it seems like it's politics as usual on Capitol Hill. And at the same time, we're starting to see rumblings out of China. And actually, today there was an article that came out of the Global Times, and this one specifically is talking about China's central bank moving closer to issuing digital currency. Man, the ramification of this. So, and you were just bringing that up, regarding Alipay, which is a financial arm of Alibaba, having some part in this. So, where do you place what's been happening?
So I think that it probably started with China a few years ago, obviously, kind of intimating that they're going to enter the digital asset space with their own currency. Um, it makes a lot of sense for China because they have a lot of logistical problems just communicating with all of their people. And you have villages and then tiny little villages and then big cities. And so it would make more sense logistically to have a digital currency transmission system, in the same way that we would text or anything else. So they've kind of been on the ball for a while, and it looks like that we're learning now that the U.S. has also been in the game just as long, if not longer. And I guess we could unpack this and say the minute that the Chinese kind of openly admitted that they were going to be part of this digital, the central bank digital asset game, every country was put on notice, I think. And the US has to be really careful that the Chinese don't come out of the gate with something that's so easy to use that other countries just de facto start using their currency, because even though they're pegged to the US dollar, well, that would be a lot of threat to dollar sovereignty for many reasons. And we can go into the economics of it too, but I think it just makes a lot of sense. It also makes a lot of sense because you have in China, hundreds of millions of completely unbanked citizens. And so you have to find a way to include them in the financial economy. Otherwise, you have this subset of barter that's always occurring. And I don't think they want that. I think, the Chinese more than anyone want, complete, control, like anything, right? They want complete control of the currency system, and they want to be able to flick people on and off. And I think that's what the U.S. would like to do too. I mean, if we have Fed bank accounts, well, let's say that they require us to pay our taxes and to receive our Social Security and pension benefits. And, by the time the Fed goes through and buys every single thing there is that's not, chained to the floor, there won't be much. They're going to be the buyer, the lender, the loaner, the taxer of last resort for the entire planet Earth by the time this is over with, maybe by the end of this year.
That's a solid point. And so here we are thinking about that, and actually I was listening to Ivan on Tech earlier this morning. He was talking about a very similar concept, that as and really from a political perspective, it's a real fine line between maintaining a democracy and going into a government controlled system, a political, construct that, I don't know if we really have a term for it yet as to, what could potentially happen. But what the writing is already on the wall, because we see what's happening over in China, and they've already had social scoring and a lot of other things. So what you're talking about, which is interesting, and actually there was an article on payments.com, alluding also to the fact that the U.S. House wants the economic stimulus to be moved through and leverage e-wallets. In order to leverage the e-wallets to move the dollars to those e-wallets, we saw in the at least the draft bill that was released yesterday, they're talking about this digital dollar construct. And so from a digital dollar perspective, if everything goes digital, like what you're saying, taxation, if there, we get into a period of time where there's negative interest rates,
Right.
and not just the bank, now charging you, but if the government wants to charge you, so like you had mentioned, auto taxation, so you don't even have to pay your taxes; they're just going to be taken from you. They're going to leverage the power of the government against the lack of power of the individual, and really hold you accountable, and hold your monetary well-being hostage. I think that's definitely detrimental. Is that kind of where you see? I mean, what would be behind it from a political perspective that they would want to push our economy in that direction?
Well, the Fed will do it under the auspices of instant liquidity, right? So think about the way the system works right now, this second, right? But they haven't gotten in and bought everything up yet. They did put forward this week just a variety of new programs that allow them to go, which by the way, they all violate the the Reserve Act of like 1913 or whatever when they put, but that doesn't matter because whatever. But let's just say they were legal what they're doing because they're going to do it. So they're going to go in and they're going to buy mutual funds. They're going to buy assets from hedge funds. They're going to buy assets from pension funds. They're going to buy municipal bonds. They're going to buy corporate debt. I don't even know how they're going to determine what they're going to buy, but these guys are going on a shopping spree, and they've been very vocal and clear. They're buying everything. So let's fast forward. Now they own everything. They're the buyer of last resort, the lender of last resort, and they become the de facto liquidity provider for the entire, at least the US system in real time. So before, what they would have had to do was they would have had to create extra reserves on the accounts held at the Federal Reserve for the prime banks. And they would say, okay, we want you to go into the market and we want you to do this, we want you to do that. And so, for instance, they would say, we want you to go pile up on mortgage-backed securities. They'd say, fine. So they would give them liquidity. The prime banks would then take that, knowing that their bank account was full. They would go into the market, into either the Fed funds market, or they would go into the whatever market the Fed kind of directed them into. And then the Fed kind of had to hope that they did their bidding. So the Fed, at least until just now, I mean, for the history of the United States, has been an expectation market. We have an expectation of this rate throughout the day. You aggregate all those transactions, and you see what the Fed funds rate is. And this occurs in all these markets, right? And so, but the Fed was not actively doing the buying. What would happen is, once the prime brokers did their bidding, they would take those assets, they would trade them to the Fed, they would go on the Fed's balance sheet, and then they would be given the next mission: go out and do this, go do that. So that's kind of where we were. All that changed over the last few days. So moving forward, you got to assume, okay, if there's some kind of crisis, I think we could call this a crisis. The Fed would like to be able to provide liquidity in absolute real time. So if Jerome Powell wakes up at 3 a.m. and he says, man, American Airlines needs a bailout, boop, done. What that also does is, one, doesn't have to necessarily run their offensive maneuvers through a bunch of shell banks. It creates a really cool scenario where they could do all sorts of things that we never hear about. I also think on the plus side, they could better manage the growth of the United States, at least from the monetary side, as far as how big the wallet is, how quick they can push liquidity out and suck it back. But they're going to own everything. And that gets into a weird question, like, so if they own everything, if there's always a buyer for everything all the time, where do we go from here? So you got to say, well, I mean, this only ends up in hyperinflation at some point, but it's definitely going to end up in inflation, because now the money's escaping the balance sheet of the Fed. It's escaping those reserve accounts of those prime banks. The Fed used to say, well, nothing we do creates inflation because the money's not escaping the system. We have the assets on our balance sheet, and we have those bank accounts for those banks in the Fed. So essentially the money just is swirling around inside the Fed. But that's not the case now. So money will escape, because if they go into the markets and buy corporate debt, and they buy mutuals, and they prop the pension funds up by buying munis, and all this stuff, including stocks and other less described assets, which could be some CEO has a baseball card from the Mickey Mantle rookie or something. Yep. I mean, they could buy it. They could buy everything. That money is escaping. That money is going directly into our economy. So the real economy is going to swell with cash. And then you have the problem of a bigger pile of cash chasing the same small amount of consumer products. And I think that's where you'll start to have the vacillations of inflation. We'll start to see it.
So now, I mean, it's interesting, because then we really have some conflict, because you have the Fed now competing with the Chinese. So this is assuming that the Chinese economy, I kind of am under a belief, just by monitoring what's going on politically over in China, that there's a bit of consolidation within the government. There's always been a struggle in China between the communist political system and this capitalist economy that they allowed to grow. In the early years, the communist regime was very reluctant to allow the freedom of growth in the economic sector. However, we're starting to see this consolidation of power. We have President Xi, who's really afraid that he's going to lose power, and he was losing it to private business. And so, it's interesting, because now you have there's a power struggle going on between the new business, the new millionaires and billionaires in China, that have now grown up in this environment of freedom of economic growth, yet they're confronting a communist political regime that now wants to silence them. Same thing that you have going on over in Russia, where you have a consolidation of power in order to silence or crush some of the growth in the private economic space. And so now, if you have that kind of consolidation, you also have a decline in the economy over in China. So if you have a decline in economy over in China, if you have the U.S. pulling out the majority of the manufacturing, if there's penalties on the manufacturers and the companies that do manufacture over in China for cheap labor, we're going to see a decline. But yet even during that decline, right now, China still sits on a boatload of cash, and they're in a power position to start buying right now. So I don't know if we can kid ourselves, even as the economy kind of falls down. And really, there should be a clear distinction between what's happening from a national economic perspective and what happens in the markets. Right? The markets are reacting to media and news, and it's kind of crazy. One day Trump does this conference, and then the market goes up. Then he has a different conference, and the market goes down. And it's just been this roller coaster ride based on emotion. But yet, what are the big whales doing during this whole period of time? What companies are they gobbling up, and what are the Chinese doing? When this is all said and done, how much of business in the U.S. does China own a large share of at this point?
Well, I mean, I guess we have to just kind of look past Corona and go back to a post-Corona world and say that things have relatively, worked themselves out. So the thing that's different about China is that China, when we're doing business with the UK or when we're doing business with Mexico, their businesses sell us products. We ship those products back and forth. So the US dollars that they have, they go onto the swaps market, so to the exchange, FX markets, and they exchange their currency. So they say they'll sell their dollars and grab pound sterling, or they'll grab pesos or whatever. The PBOC has a different issue. The way the PBOC does it in China is all of the dollars that come in go back to the PBOC, and they warehouse all that, and they do that to defend their currency. So they have pegged their currency to our currency, and that's all fine and good. For their sake, they use the dollars to manage that currency peg. And if the dollar gets weak, they can sell their currency against the dollar. They can buy up dollar, and so that's how you manage a currency. Well, if this situation is too dire for them, they're going to become a net seller of dollars, and they have a lot of dollars to sell. So that's one whole thing that I don't think people have really factored in yet. That's something that's going to play on us. But how does this relate back to digital dollar? Well, like, everything they do could be smoother and more efficient, which would force us into the market too. So, for instance, if the Chinese have a smoother and more efficient way to move goods and services around and transfer currency, well, then other countries are going to say, wow, that's pretty easy. It makes it that much easier to do business. Maybe if I have a choice between buying US goods or Chinese goods, they're about the same price. I mean, it's a lot easier to work with the Chinese. And maybe countries like the idea of going from their sovereign currency in real time into another currency and back, that kind of flip flop. And rather than gathering up a bunch of money and having to go to the swaps market and do all this crazy stuff, digital assets, as we all know, allow them to do this in real time. So I think these efficiencies that we see, that especially all of us that are kind of a little bit more into the space for the last couple of years than your average Joe Sixpack,
Right.
we see
Yeah,
all these
that's great.
efficiencies. We take it for granted, but I don't think that the regular natural world necessarily gets it. And then the other
They
side
probably
of it
don't,
is
right?
you have 3
They probably
billion
don't.
people that are unbanked. They don't have a clue. And I think that the other big argument, and this is from just a humanitarian perspective, is that you have 3 billion plus unbanked or marginally banked humans. And that's just a problem. I mean, these are people that have really been left behind. And so if you can create economic inclusion through digital assets and through digital sovereigns, that's going to make a huge difference. It's going to bring half of the planet into the financial sphere. And who knows what the reaction is. So then
Yeah.
you say, okay, what's the next step? Let's go 5 years out. Now every country deals in digital sovereign assets, central bank backed currencies. Then you start wondering if these central banks necessarily need other banks at all. And so I think you could see a collapse from the rural and provincial banks upwards, a bottom up collapse into where the only banks left are prime banks, just because they're customer facing. And
Right.
maybe they disappear.
And then you end up with the
Maybe
Fed,
we
and yeah,
only deal with Fed. Yeah.
and
Why?
that's
Why?
and that's
Yeah.
scary. I mean, that's a real scary thought. So here we are. where initially the last time we turned to your whiteboard and we were talking about the Fed and what's involved in it, we were talking about the prime banks, and so with the new e-wallet, basically the prime banks are going to be in control of the movement of these e-wallets supposedly. That's what it
Well,
looked
no,
like, right?
no, they're just going to be parked there. What the Fed is saying is that they're going to provide the real time liquidity back and forth, it's stimulus in real time. But the prime banks and the post offices have to offer those services, even to undocumented. So any human, they're basically saying any human in the United States is going to have access to these accounts, and they're not going to have to pay these check cashing services, which
Right.
makes you wonder how many days left Western Union has.
If this goes through. This would be, full government and third party Fed entity takeover of the private sector. So, and I think this is the real fine line of where, the potential of our political infrastructure, can move, and so we have to be very cognizant of maintaining our republic and not allowing it to move into theocracy or I don't even know what it would be called at that point, because it wouldn't necessarily be a socialist state, but it'd be
We'll
a
call
Fed controlled state. I'm not even sure what would you label it?
a digitocracy.
A digitocracy, right? I like that. Yeah, that's probably a good term coined here, a digitocracy. I like that. I just want to say what's up to some people that are in the room. If you guys can do us a favor and tweet this out, it'd be great. I just want to say what's up to Richter. He just walked in. We've got Jerry Hall with us. Jerry Hall has the show as well, one on one with Jerry Hall. We had some good content dropping from Jerry lately. We got Dan in here. We got Doc Colum. A lot of great people in here. Nova. We've got Don. What is that? Alkinson or Atkinson. I know I can't read it, but and then we got George. So just who else we got here? Who let the Bulls out is in the room chatting as well. I really appreciate everybody being here with us tonight. We have a lot more to talk about. So we just sit tight, throw in some comments, throw in some questions about this because I think things are just getting started. I think I believe that we're going to see a heck of a lot more go on and come out of government, especially as they're trying to accomplish this bailout. And it just amazes me that here they are trying to help people, where now we're going to go on day 3 to where there still hasn't been a vote. What's crazy about all of this, here they are trying to figure out a stimulus for the people, and, are they really thinking about the workers? Are they thinking about the small business owners? Who do they really have in mind as they're putting the stimulus package together? As we're seeing all sorts of fat and garbage that was put into this bill that they're trying to vote on. So instead of just saying, hey, we know businesses are suffering, people are suffering, we got to get this figured out. And instead it became, just political wrangling. And I keep going back to, Rahm Emanuel actually came out again yesterday and said you have to take advantage of a crisis. Don't let a good crisis, go unused or use whatever he says. But it's crazy. Yeah, there it is. Dan posted it right away. Never let a good crisis go to waste. And that seems to be what they're doing. So here they are. They're saying, hey, we got this crisis. People are in panic mode. Let's just load up all the fat we can load up and take advantage of the people. I don't like that. I think it's, yeah, a real negative trend setting maneuvering by the political so-called elite, whether they're Democrat or Republican. I think it's really, not in, in lock and step with what this country stands for and what the country needs right now for the people. And the other component of that, so as we keep getting into this digital wallet, this is what keeps driving me back, because how is it that members of the Financial Services Committee are open to talking about this digital wallet now, whereas for the past 2 years, you've had people coming to them and like Warren Davidson's office with a Token Taxonomy Act and all these different acts for a digital asset and the normalcy and regulatory clarity for the digital asset space. Yet they keep focusing, oh, the people. What about the people? How are we going to protect the investors? And the other side keeps saying, well, what about terrorism and anti-money laundering and all these other things? We're so worried about that. But now they're willing to just, here's the digital, here it is centralized. Let's give it to the control of the Fed, and let's just, wash our hands of it, and do it in a stressful crisis situation where people are basically, the way they look at it, looking down on the people that are begging for the pennies handout that they want to give them, this $1,200 chump change payoff for individuals. It's just complete bullshit. Man, it just
Well,
kills me.
well, you kind of touched on a bunch of things. I think the first thing you want to, not the first thing, I think an interesting thing that you want to, everybody that we talk to, when I talk to my new clients, the first thing I say is, for the last 11 years, 94% of the gains in the equities market, that's basically all of it, right? 94% was from corporate buybacks made possible by your friends at the Fed. So with this context now, here we are, we have this exogenous event, the virus comes and I contend that this was going to happen no matter what. Probably not this fast, but I contend that it was coming. But let's put this aside just for a second. We know that the Fed is interesting in the way they do business. So let's go back to last summer when Facebook is having these hearings. We're going to release Libra. It's going to be great. It's going to be a basketed currency. It's going to be like an SDR. Yeah. It makes a lot more sense now, the kind of pushback they were getting. If you think, wait a minute, the whole time the US probably had in development a digital asset, a central bank digital dollar, the wallet technology and all this, and they didn't have to build it from scratch. You can look at every single exchange. I don't doubt that Coinbase was probably a part of this, simply because they're in bed with the regulators. They turned over all their books, what have you. Even though I like the exchange, whatever. So that's a whole different thing. But it now in context makes sense why they pan every project that makes it to them. Why they tell Telegram no, they restraining orders sustained. You're not selling your tokens. Why they won't let Kick run the Kin token. Why they won't let. I mean, it makes a lot of sense when you now, with the backdrop of, oh yeah, because for the last 2 to 3 years they were building a technology that they're going to roll out in their own, and they probably, this is, if not this one, the next speed bump will be the one where they'll roll out these things, or maybe later in the year they'll say, hey, listen, for people that are marginally employed, self-employed, half employed, here's a quick way to get your tax, your tax settlement, or here's a good way to get your Social Security, or your pension fund payments, and they can force all of us in the market that way. I mean, if they tell me I have a Fed account with $2,000 in it, my dumb ass is going to sign up for my Fed account.
That's right. Now, you want the Fed, you don't know what you're giving away to get it, right?
But my contention is, now you have a whole country, 300 and change million people, that have a digital asset. Now that asset will be traded on other exchanges. And depending on how it's held and manipulated, I now have the ability to go and buy Bitcoin. And if I see that they're printing or creating the digital dollar every day, ding, 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 185 billion a day is what the Fed's purchasing now, 185 billion a day. So if I say, man, that's happening every day, and my digital dollar is getting watered down, or if they hit me with negative interest rates, they charge me 1.5–2% per year just to hold that money in the account. Well, let me tell you this, Bitcoin is going to see 100K in 6 months.
Yeah, that'd be crazy. Yeah,
and gold is probably going to reprice too. I mean, it's probably should be 10,000 an ounce. But all this is to say that I think for us to win in the digital community, we're going to win and lose. Those of us that are kind of walking our way into this market, whether you own Bitcoin or XRP or Ethereum or a basket of all of them or whatever, when this happens, when this kind of, I don't know what you want to call it, our digitocracy takes over and everybody has digital assets to some extent, whether it's going or coming, payments or receipts or tax kickbacks or tax payments or whatever, liens, housing payments, whatever you have. Then there's going to be ability to escape that money seamlessly into digital assets. And you're going to see the digital asset space bloat really, really fast because people aren't stupid. And so then the people that would be the gold bugs that now have this digital dollar say, you know what? Bitcoin looks a lot like gold right now.
That's interesting.
And I think we get a lot of movement into Bitcoin. Ethereum, I don't see it going anywhere. It's not my favorite project, but anyway, I think that creates a lot of new customers that we're not even thinking of right now. So we get what we want, but we also lose a lot of security and privacy and autonomy in the process.
A lot. I mean, it's whether they created their own, which people have been somewhat pushing for, or they're taking over what already exists. Um, so, and obviously they didn't make this overnight. There's no way they can say, oh, e-wallets, we're going to roll this out on e-wallets. And oh, by the way, something that's going to take you 12 years to build, we're building it overnight, and
Yeah.
here it is. And
You're
you're going to
welcome.
use it. You're welcome. Yeah. So what is it? The faster payment network that the Fed was supposed to build. And they
Yeah.
said, we're not doing it. We don't care about it. And we need 5 more years. So did they really need the 5 years? At what point did they start? They're not stupid. The financial institutions aren't stupid. Most people are very keen, other than what they come out and say in the media is one thing. They're saying they talk over here, then they're doing stuff over here. Whatever they're doing over here is when they're getting their investments ready, because even in the stock market, they're always leveraging themselves at the lowest possible point. By the time they start talking about it, it's too late. They've already been in,
Yeah.
they've already made their big bump, and then they start talking, it bumps up further. They expect the cream on the top for them are all those retail investors that are buying out at the big numbers.
The
They
suckers.
sell, and right, the suckers, they sell the rest of their holdings or whatever. They make that cream, they pull that out, and they make a ton of money that way. And they must have been doing this and orchestrating and and plotting whatever big bump they're going to have in the digital asset space as they do with the stock space. It's absolutely insane. And there's some comments here. Dan said, I bet every bank account already has a digital wallet. That's an interesting statement, because could you imagine where they've already replicated your bank accounts somehow with a digital wallet, and they've already attributed that number, because that number has got to be accounted for someplace. It's accounted for in the bank. The bank has to report their holdings. Some way, somehow, they're audited, right? I mean, there's got to be some, monitoring of the process to someone. They're beholden to somebody,
Right.
right?
Well, and
So,
they're also calculating interest in real time, all the time. And not only in the bank accounts, but in the little holding accounts in between each account. So, like if you have a savings account and a debit card and a checking account, you think, well, I have three accounts, but you actually have five accounts. You have the checking, the savings, the debit and checking, the debit and savings, the savings and debit. So they all have interlocked little tendrils for counting interest in real time.
yeah,
And so, yeah,
that's
it's
crazy to me,
so it's
so
a
it's
it's a
easy
it's a
for
woven
them.
mess. That
Yeah.
being said,
So if they decide to
I
flip
think it
the
would
switch
be,
tomorrow, what's going to
yeah.
happen?
Well, I don't think they're ready to do it personally. I don't think they have the infrastructure to do it yet. Maybe, but I think that they're floating this idea. I would bet $1 million that it will not make it to the final bill. It'll be stripped out of there. But I think that they floated the idea and they were vocal enough about it, even Pelosi,
Yeah,
that it's interesting. Why did they take a stand on this one relatively insignificant issue? Um,
that's right.
so I think that they're just getting the idea out there, getting people comfortable with it. And if in a month, or let's say this first part of the stimulus package, they just simply pump checks out to everyone. Well, that's going to be madness. What if you're out of town? What if you're whatever? So they're going to have some issues with that. And let's say 2 or 3 weeks later, maybe they do roll out these wallets and they say, listen, we sent the first checks out. Boy, was that a mess. We can all agree that that was a mess. We're going to make it easier for you. I, Donald Trump, am going to give everyone a digital wallet. So within 10 seconds, you can have your money.
Huh.
Boom. And if
That's
you park money online and tell people go get your money, take your social security card, take your whatever your valid public ID, passport ID, whatever, and set up your account, it takes 10 minutes. Everyone will do it. Everyone. And you know checkmate. I
it's
mean,
easy. It would be easy. I
yeah.
mean, that's very very easy for them to move it over. I think a lot of what we're witnessing are, we see a test. It's interesting with what we're facing right now. So you have a spread of the illness, this virus that's spreading. But I also see that it's, from a control perspective, I find it really interesting how fast the entire world more or less capitulated to the request of the governments to say, uh, we're shutting everything down. You're staying inside. We're shutting your businesses. People are going to be unemployed because of it. We're shutting down the restaurants. We're shutting down the hotels. People are no longer able to gather in crowds of more than 10. I was talking to somebody yesterday, and he brought up, and I said, what's the purpose of separating people?
Quelling a rebellion.
Exactly. So he brought that up. He said, so the militias can't gather. And I said, that's
Right.
exactly what it is. If you don't have people, we can communicate, through video, but typically, if something is, like this is going on and people are still gathering and you're not going to shut it down, at what point does the government interfere with people's gathering? Right? So they're saying no weddings, no funerals, no gatherings of a militia. That to me is, whether it's going to happen now or in the near future, it's a test. Whether it's going to happen in this country or another country, we've seen it happen in other countries very quickly. They don't have standing militias, but at the same time, if you look at like in Iran or China, they can quell any rebellion very quickly. They can come in and stamp out the population as fast as they want to. In this country, it's always been a little bit different. We always have the ingenuity of the American people. We always have a little bit of discontent and distrust in the government as a people. It's just ingrained in the American culture, in the American society. But there are standing militias in almost every single state, as far as I'm aware, and there's some big ones like in Michigan. The Michigan militia was a big deal. Those are privately, private standing armies, the militia, where people get together, they train, and they train for military style training. And so I have to believe that although the governments are saying don't gather to quell any type of rebellion in the street, like they've seen before, everybody's in their homes, it's a lot easier now to put down any form of conflict or tension because the majority of the people aren't in the streets. The roads are relatively clear, depending on what state you're in, I guess. If you go to, you're driving in South Florida, there's still a lot of traffic. People are still running about in every direction. But but it just seems that things are being orchestrated.
So I would say this. I tend to think that this is actually. Um, Let me see how to phrase this. I think this is innocent. This is purposeful, and this is the best to contain the hospital system as it stands. I do agree with the science behind spreading people out, getting them locked in their houses, and just maintain the hospital system because once we roll over into triage, this whole thing blows up and it just gets nasty.
I agree with that
So,
too on that part of it. Yep.
but that being said, you can get a lot of data from this process, right? So this is a public experiment. So if you treat it like a big petri dish, think about what they're learning. Well, I shouldn't say they. Think about what we're all learning about how we can just be dissipated. I mean, I haven't seen a police officer other than my buddy. I haven't seen a police officer, and no one came to me and said stay at home. But we're all staying. We're all basically playing ball, and
Yep.
it lets you see how much control that maybe a similar incident. So this could be opportunistic for the collection of data and things like that. I also think, unrelated to this, if we just attack the stimulus part of this, the whole stimulus bill is looking for what it's going to be somewhere between two and maybe it bloats up to $4 trillion, and that sounds really bad until you think about, wait, what did the Fed do last week? Well, they have 13.65 trillion that they have stood up for standing in overnight repo. 13.65 trillion. But everybody in the world is like, the market is going up and down based on 2 trillion. Why? Because it's going to get in everybody's hands. And you go, wow. So you could buy off the American public for about $1,200 a person. We are cheap, man. And we're missing the fact that the Fed is likely, when they come into these other markets, they may spend 30, 40 trillion dollars this year. Trillion. And we're, holding our breath over our $1,200 check, and the $2 trillion bill. I mean,
Which
it, it's nothing.
it's
It's it's nothing, and we
yeah,
know it's nothing because it's all made up anyway.
that's right. Yeah, it's all made up numbers. Yeah, the whole thing
It's
is
all made up on it's a computer generated number. So I think a little bit of it is kind of a sleight of hand, like, look over here, everyone. $2 trillion I'm going to sprinkle on you, and there's 40 trillion bucks right here that they're just going to go right. And look, you want to see how they hook their buddies up? They don't have to give anything to anybody through this
yeah,
through this stimulus package. They could give everything to the American people, because they're gonna hook them up when they buy Boeing stock, buy American stock, buy Carnival Cruise Lines, buy every single company they like. If they don't like you, if you've made enemies, if you're part of a lobby, if you've done the wrong thing, if you haven't played ball, guess what? Your company's not going to get stimulus from the Fed. They're just going to overlook and say, we don't like your balance sheet. We're not going to buy your company's debt. I mean, talk about picking winners. This is when we're going to see. This is when true corruption starts. I mean, this is moral hazard times like 50.
yeah,
And
yeah,
there's no turning back from this, because we've seen it. There's no turning back from QE. When QE started, that was the beginning of the end of that kind of, I mean, never again will the system be uncorrupted. That's it. They've never wound down their balance sheet. They've never normalized rates. They've never anything. Once QE started, that was the beginning of the end, I think. And now it's just a slow burn into inflation.
hmm. Yeah. So that's so inflation. You have the Fed. You've got really a major impact on our economy that isn't necessarily for the good. It's not for the good of the people. And so this is you know and again, don't let a good crisis go. Don't waste a good
Go waste.
crisis.
Yeah.
And you know that's something that we got to keep repeating over and over again, because that's their mindset. And whether or not this is the black swan event that pushes it over the top. But the way you look at the political turmoil that's going on, and then you really wonder, how much of this is a hoax? How much of this is for real? How much of this isn't for real? How what's going to happen 2 weeks from now? Is all of a sudden is all this going to just poof disappear into obscurity, and everybody's life is going to go on as usual again? How long do they need to keep people separated in order to quell the militia mentality, and
Well,
put the people down? At some point, I give it, about a month before people start, rising up and getting really pissed off. If they don't, if there's not a solution within 2 weeks, 3 weeks maximum, with people cooped up in their houses. So whether it's like, New York City or wherever it might be, people aren't going to tolerate it. But I find it interesting that the states that are forcing the quarantine issue are also the states that are under Democrat rule, like California, Washington, Illinois, and New York. Florida, the governor of Florida specifically came out and said that he doesn't want to do that. He wants people out to work. He said, if we have to put everybody in and close all these businesses, it's going to be extremely detrimental to the economy. And he came out and said, we don't need to do it because New York is doing it. And at the same time, if those are the epicenters of this virus, then we need to quarantine the epicenters, and the rest of the country doesn't have to suffer. But so now we look at these areas like a New York City. How long can they go on, living in that environment where they can't get out? I mean, I just can't believe and that it's going to go on much longer, before the tensions flare.
Well,
What do you think?
people get stir crazy. That makes sense. People sitting in their house, and people talk and people start to suspect, and that can become tenuous, obviously. And who wants to spend any days more than they have to with their in-laws? So in those situations, I can see little civil wars occurring in each house. Um, from a medical perspective, I think what the states that aren't enforcing some kind of restriction of social activity, they're kind of whistling past the graveyard. I mean, we know how this works. We've seen this, and when you have, a pathogen that moves around like this does and is so transmissible, you know, again, it's just not fair to say, well, it hasn't killed as many people as the flu, therefore it's not. Well, we don't know yet. We need to give it a full year, give it a full couple cycles and see. So I think I do agree with the science behind keeping people dissipated and all that. It also happens to be the same science behind quelling an internal revolution or some kind of public strife, right? I do want to comment on something you had brought up, kind of reminded me of something, these small business failures. Um, I have a slightly different opinion. I think we may have talked about that the other time, but is that if you have a business, it's just like a person. If you have a person that can't last 1 month without working before he's bankrupt, you got to sit that person down and say, man, if you get through this, we really have to talk about putting some savings away. Scale your buying back a little bit. You don't need to have that, the Lexus or the whatever. People need some fiscal restraint, and Americans don't have it. We live off credit cards. We want to we want to one up or keep up with our neighbors and things like that. And I think it's this psychology has really screwed us up financially. And to be fair, we don't learn this stuff in school. You're not really taught how to manage money. You're not taught basic finance, not with any, degree of utility. And so I worry that, the average American, they say, well, he's got, one paycheck or two paychecks and he's destitute. How is that even possible? So I say, that's a guy that doesn't manage his money. So let's take that up to the next step. And I'm probably going to offend a lot of people, but if you have a business and it's a small business, and I know it's a struggle and America's tough, but if you have a small business and you don't have more than a month of cash in reserves, then you're not running a real business. And unfortunately, an adult needs to come in and kind of teach you some skills to manage that business. I know that sounds harsh, but I think a lot of these businesses should fail. I don't think they should be bailed out. Now,
Yeah, I agree.
with the caveat that if this lasts 5 or 6 months and it turns out that a U.S. response months earlier would have prevented all of this, well, of course you have to provide some aid. But if you can't make it a month, you're not really a business. You're an insolvency credit farm.
Right.
You
That's
know,
a great point, because here we are a week into this thing, and
yeah,
and all chaos is broken. It's
it's over,
insane.
man. It's
Yeah,
over.
I've never seen anything like this, to where they're already talking about bailouts for people that are a week out, and that is interesting, because what is that tipping point? A lot of people live paycheck to paycheck. The small businesses, depending on how small they are, but if it's a family run, hopefully they do have money put aside and they can function. There's that point, with where they're relying on, especially seasonal business, where a specific period of time is really all their revenue for the year. So let's say, a spring break environment where a restaurant or a bar does the majority of their business in a certain period of time, and then the rest of the year they're living off of whatever they made during that influx. Maybe they hired extra people to support it, and then they go into, and so here we are kind of at that peak in certain areas, like in Florida, for instance. We're at the peak of the tourism season, and all tourism gets shut down. But this is where they're making the boatload of their money right now. So in a scenario like that, it has a much more detrimental impact on the
Sure.
economy, on that business, than it would if you just have regular day-to-day business transaction. But even then, there should be, there has to be some mechanism in place. But it's a catastrophe. You should be able to go 2 weeks. A business should be able to go 2 weeks and say, hey, we're shutting down the business for 2 weeks. Everybody's still employed, everything's great, but we need to take a hiatus. Everybody's going on vacation for 2 weeks, and we're still paying everybody's salaries. So maybe they can survive 2 weeks, maybe they can go 3 weeks, maybe a month, but they're still supporting their ecosystem. They're still paying all of their employees. They're still paying everything. So that month goes by. Now they go, what happens next. So I would agree that some of those that are going moment to moment, and here we are a week into it, and everybody's already, in terrified mode. And all they did by doing it, it would, again, I look at it, the reason why this whole crisis and all of the reactionary aspect of it, a lot of it has to do to not letting the crisis go to waste. The media
Yep.
stoked it and stoked it and stoked it, and whether it was true or not true, the media still now continues, to stoke the fears with inaccurate information. And that is the unfortunate dilemma. Even today, there was an
Right.
article that it was posted on Business Insider. I know we've strayed so far out of digital asset talking about economics, but here we have, Trump has been on TV the past few days talking about that chloroquine, plus the Zithromax, with a Z pack,
Right.
possibly add a little zinc to it, a little vitamin D, a little C, a little A, and you got yourself a nice cocktail. The thing is, they were talking about the chloroquine being used in South Korea 3 weeks ago. So
Right.
the fact that it all of a sudden popped up a week ago, the media, they're just talking to their you know there used to be that term, the vidiots, that would just sit
Yeah.
in front of the TV and just absorb everything you see on TV. I don't know
Right.
if they're the mediates now. I don't know what you want to call them, but it's crazy to me that here they are. Just look, do a little research, pay attention. But 3 weeks ago, people were posting on chloroquine. Now all of a sudden, out of the blue, oh, France has been doing a research. Oh, it could be positive. Okay, that's awesome. Did it really work in South Korea? Is it really going to work now? They're already showing that there's some positive trend. Whatever. That wasn't my whole point. My point with the media was also that, so today on some New Times article in Arizona, I don't know, it was a bullshit article, paper, but then the Business Insider picks it up as well, and it all had to do with some husband and wife. I don't know if you saw that. He's 68 years old. They were watching the news. Both of them supposedly healthy. They go out and buy or find chloroquine. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but they got the powder version that's used for cleaning aquariums. So they both consume
I
it.
feel like this story doesn't end well.
Right. So they both consume it. The husband dies. And this just happened, like, I don't know, in the past day or two. The wife ends up in the hospital, right? And now they're interviewing her, and she said, "Oh, well, but Trump has been telling us how great this is, and that it's, for use against the virus and all this stuff, and you can't trust him, and whatever he's saying." And I'm like, "Are you kidding? This is what the media is running with?" Instead of the media saying, "People, don't use chloroquine aquarium version." Whatever it is, that's
Yeah.
not meant for consumption. It's not being made by a pharmaceutical company with regulation and whatever they need to do to make it consumable for humans. I mean, it doesn't take much to contemplate this process, but the media takes it and they create the hype and the emotion and the headlines. Man dies for using Trump touted solution. Like
Right.
this, these are their headlines. Like, how destructive and demented are the media outlets? And the organizations that I would love to see go out of business are the media. I would love to see these media outlets finally get what they deserve and go out of business, and get whatever. Yeah, it's just so disgusting what they use. And then Google comes after people on YouTube because they're telling the truth. It's just crazy. I want to give a shout out to Tom Mullins. $10, man. Thank you very much for that. Great job to us. I appreciate that a lot. That's awesome. So, uh,
Well, it's kind of frustrating. I've never, not recently anyway, looked at the news as being the news. I've always just looked at it as being just kind of an interesting pulse of the way that people in the media, and I don't mean the actual people we see on TV, but the people that are kind of in charge, the Turners and the guys like that, that the way they want information to propagate out. And so I learn a lot by, like, I would watch CNBC and of course assume that that's a sales channel.
right.
There's
Yeah.
no
That's
news
all it
coming.
is.
There's no news coming from CNBC. You can almost do
That's
the
right.
exact opposite of whatever they
Right.
say and be on
And
top of the market.
that's right.
They're just a mess. But it is interesting to see, what is the kind of the theme that they're trying to present, and so you can see it. And in this case with Corona, it's funny because the U.S. media ignored it and basically shit talked it and said that anybody talking about Corona is an idiot. It's not real. It's not this. And then all of a sudden it was real, and they went into overhyped panic mode. So where one day they're saying this is stupid, and anybody who talks about Corona is an idiot and a quack, to
Right.
the next day, you might have it. Your uncle probably does have it. Have you ever? You might have, like, what the shit? And it just they did an about face, and I think that is a very normal, that is a normal kind of symptom of media. It's not news media, but it's just media. No
Right.
different than if you get off Instagram, it's about as accurate.
That's that's true. It's as entertaining. I just want to say what's up to Bob Moneybags just popped in here, and yeah, it's awesome. So yeah, this is it's crazy. I mean, we can go on and on this topic forever. I think there's just so much. Let me bring up. I think we've been going almost like an hour here.
uh,
Try to see how time it's just amazing.
do we
Um,
have any questions in the chat? Some stuff we could address if there's any
that'd be great.
curiosity about. Yeah.
I see. I don't see any specific question. If you guys have any questions, anything that you would like us to address on this, throw them out there. That would be, definitely. We'd love to be able to answer and talk about that. I'm trying to find. So there's another one here. Central bank digital currency. So the IMF. So here we go. Someone Dan, I think earlier on was talking about incrementalism that we know DNI talks a lot about. He talks a lot about incrementalism. But so all these things, all these things are working in tandem right now. The e-wallet, the digital, the CBDC coming out of China, all of these things happening during this crisis mode. Um, and then this was last week though. This was March 20th. I pulled this article, and it was central bank digital currency incredibly rich area, says the IMF. This was on bitcoinist.com. But the benefits of digital currency emphasized. So they went into the pros and cons of digital currency, and it's interesting. It's just really, really interesting from the IMF perspective. So what's happening when the whole world all of a sudden, it seems like anyways, everyone's trying to push for regulatory clarity. Everybody wants the digital asset economy. Now there seems to be this momentum, and it's coming from so many different directions right now. Um, the scary part of it is, like we were talking about, the scary part is the centralized nature of this digital economy. It's not what those that wrote the original white paper on Bitcoin thought about, when they were talking about the distancing from the banking structure. Now everybody's pushing. Now it's moving in a different direction, and so does that, I see some benefit though. So this is the interesting part to take from all of this. You have, if you have the Fed creating a digital dollar, um, however, the Fed kind of has their fingerprints all over the world. But if you have these central bank digital assets, they still need to move and transact their central bank digital currencies between banks, between nations. There has to be a mechanism in place, a software mechanism to allow for the streamlined communication and processing of those transactions to occur. There has to be that common language. Um,
Enters the ILP.
Correct. There we go. So you bring that to the table. We know that they're all over the place. They're doing a ton. And so it's just, at what point does that all start coming together? And does that aspect of it allow for the decentralized nature of this new digital, economy? Does it kind of balance out the centralization with a little decentralization? Is that even possible at that point?
Sure, because even if everything goes digital, the Japanese have a really cool saying, and that is that the fish will prosper where the water is murky. And so you're always going to have murky parts of economies, right? So in areas where there's barter, there's those, you could get that thing if you go down that one alley, but be careful, right? And then you go into the world of the internet and you have, okay, you could go to Silk Road, but be careful, right? Because there's bad stuff that goes on there. So there's
Right.
always going to be an element of people. I mean, again, I don't believe that anything you do with money should be illegal. If there's a crime, punish the crime. You know, if I go murder 64 people for 100 Bitcoin a piece, well, the Bitcoin didn't kill anybody. I killed those people, right? So get me for the crime. It's not the unit of account or the monetary, whatever monetary unit you use to facilitate this stuff. That's all a scammy, hoaxy excuse.
Or the weapon, I need to point out.
Yeah, right. So, but again, so I guess where I'm going with this is you can have a fully digital economy with pockets of decentralization, with pockets of Bitcoin, you know what I'm saying? So you can, and you're going to have privacy coins and things like that are off to the side. They're going to say, don't use those. We catch you using those, and people will still use them because technology will always have people that use it for the greater good and people that use it to pull scams because we're humans and that's just the way we are. So I don't think that going completely digital means Bitcoin goes away. I think it empowers and emboldens Bitcoin. I mean, if anything, if you're an investor in this space right now, if there was ever a time that you want to, start walking your way into Bitcoin, not advice, you should be plugging in some Bitcoin right now. I mean, anybody that doesn't have some Bitcoin and sees, you don't have to look at a crystal ball to see what's going on. This is happening, right? And it may not happen this month or this year, but this is happening. And so in the next 3 to 5 years, everything will be digital. And then there'll be a few people that use cash or coins here and there in the same way that your grandfather he doesn't like to text. He's like, I don't like texting or what, I don't like, he has an old phone with buttons on it, but I look at the iterations of money as updates to software in the same way that we started iOS 1 in 2006 and look how far we've come in 14 years. Right.
Yeah, it's a
So
great point. Yep.
I think there'll just be updates and iterations. You'll start with a framework. The ILP is already there. The intellectual protocol is already waiting. So we have this underground plumbing system that's waiting for us, compliments of the people at Ripple Labs. And it's waiting. And maybe, XRP isn't the end result. It doesn't get the benefit of becoming $500 a coin or whatever, but maybe it's the rails for other assets to be moved around. It could even be the rail, I contend, for Bitcoin to be moved around. But we are going into an environment where everything financial will be moving at the speed of light, or at least at the speed of electrons, through some of these different kind of protocols, like the interledger protocol, like the Bitcoin blockchain, or whatever second and third layer solutions, and sharding and ZK snarks and ring signatures and all these kinds of cool things we do. And there's always going to be people working to obfuscate, transactions, and there's going to be people on the other side saying, hey, we want to see everything that's going on in real time. And then there's going to be degrees, right? Like, so maybe I have a business with a bunch of franchises, and I want information to go one way but not the other. Maybe I want to see what all the franchises are doing, what products need to be ordered, where the money is, what cashiers are doing. But maybe I don't need them to see what I see. They don't need to see what all these other franchisees are doing. But at the head of corporate, I do need to see those things. So I can see layers of financial kind of openness and transparency, and then a certain level of opaqueness that might propagate out to different, so where you have like the DAGs and things like Hashgraph, where allow for levels of security. So again, levels of decentralization, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh
So
yeah. Oh yeah. I want to. Tom Mullins with another $10 support. Really appreciate that. Not sure how the support's going to get you those outboard motors, but said I need new outboard motors. I'm assuming on his fishing boat. He said everybody donate.
well, tell him to
Let's.
buy some Satoshis.
Yeah. Exactly. Get a couple of those and get some of the outboards. So it looks like we have a couple fishermen
I was
in the group here. I think XRP Carolina fishes, Tom Mullins into fishing. I'm sure there's others out there as well, but this has been an outstanding chat. If we go any longer, we're gonna step into DNI territory of the longest possible stream. So, but I do want to put something out there that we're working on the back end, but we're working on getting a show put together for Nick, which is going to be amazing. And I know
It's
you're
gonna be a lot of
fired up
fun.
about it.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. And I've actually talked to some of my Hollywood friends. So we'll have some guests on every now and then, and just kind of some fun people popping in. Yeah.
So and we'll have more to announce on that as we move forward, but that's going to be really really cool. Don't want to give anything else away on it, but we're looking forward to it. And there was some pretty cool music that's going into the intro. So that was really nice. Anything else that you want to bring up to wrap it for tonight? We're just a little over an hour. Um, but yeah, go ahead.
I would urge everyone, it's the same thing I do with my clients. Again, I would say anybody that hasn't read the Bitcoin white paper, it's 9 pages. Anytime you don't believe, or you're feeling down, or the market's down, or you feel just kind of beat up from all the news that's going back and forth, and the FUD and just the nonsense, read the Bitcoin white paper, and you will want to burst through the walls and just scream to everyone, can't you idiots see what's about to happen? I mean, we are the early to this party. And whether you have $2 in this market, or 200,000 or 2 million, we are very early to this market. No one here has missed anything. This is just starting.
That's the most amazing part. That's the most impressive. Also with Tom Mullins with another $10. He said, "I'm back." I think I love these comments. You can keep those funny comments going on. It's hilarious. I really appreciate you. But yeah, but that's a phenomenal point. That we are early to the space. That it is in its infancy and it's just now kind of kicking into gear, and that's the most impressive part about all of it. And people are still a little panicky, about what could happen, what's going to happen. This is, kind of like getting in to the high tech boom of the 90s in the beginning, and investing in the internet, and trying to figure it out. Yeah, obviously there were some, a good number of companies that failed very quickly. But we're going to see the same thing in this space. There's a lot of projects out there that are empty, right? That just people are just, oh, it has digital asset in it. I'm gonna pour a little money into it, and then it just gonna fizzle out and go nowhere. And people are creating, they're looking at the Bitcoin and looking at what XRP did and some of the others, and saying all you got to do is create that digital asset and just make money from it, right? And that's not accurate either. But we saw the same thing in the 90s. Anything with a .com after it, people were pouring millions and millions of dollars, and
Yep.
it just went up in smoke. It's just unbelievable. But we got some amazing, amazing, technology out of it. And if you could have invested and monitored and kind of grew with the market at that time, and those that did extremely, extremely well, diversifying, understanding, learning, educating themselves, like what you said, reading the white paper to truly understand, the technology behind it, understanding the use case. If you're going to go into and invest in XRP, understanding what's the real purpose of it, and there's the developer site, and you can get in and read, all there is to read about it, and some of it you might not understand, but a lot of it is still in relatively layman terms. You don't have to be super technical to go through some of it, but I think that's an extremely solid point. Definitely solid point.
We're new to the party. It's going to be a great party. I almost feel like, we're in so early. It's like if your neighbors are being loud and you go knock on their door and it's this young Mark Zuckerberg and he's pitching this silly idea and he's like, hey man, you want in? Give me like
Right.
20 bucks. Give him 20 bucks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like do it.
Right. Yeah. 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 Face what? That's not going to amount to anything. Nobody's going to want to share their
Yeah.
personal information on their phone.
This is a market that's 190, almost $200 billion that's going to swell to several quadrillion. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to see that there's going to be many magnitudes of hundreds and thousands and hundred thousands and millions that are going to be just pouring into this space, and it's going to bloat the assets that have utility. They're all going to bloat. You don't have to pick.
That's
You don't have to
interesting.
pick a winner. Pick. You could put 100. Whatever. I'm not going to say an amount, but you could put a little bit in the top 10 assets as they stand right now, and walk away and come back in 5 years and go buy your dream house. I mean, this just hasn't started yet. And I don't think humans are not really good at understanding logarithmic progression
It's
and
hard.
exponential growth.
It's really
It's tough.
difficult. But
Yep.
yet, but you can go back and look in the history. Obviously, you can always chart backwards. And you see, I told you, if we went too long, we're stepping on DNI territory. And who shows up at DNI? He's like, hey, these guys are going. They're in that over the hour period. That's my turf. But we do actually have, what's today? Today's Tuesday, but Thursday night we have the deep dive with DNI, so that's going to be pretty cool. Hopefully, DNI is coming up with some really in-depth stuff to talk about. I think we're going to talk about 2030, and there's some other things that came up in the last show. So that's going to be really interesting. But yeah, so I think about that period of time, where you know you look at some of the technologies. Again, you can always go back, but I think when you look at any company and you look at a successful company that's kind of run up, and you look at their stock and you go back and you try to analyze the ups and downs of the stock, what was happening, in the economy, what was happening with their company. There's always going to be a little turmoil, but the longevity of it. You look at like a Microsoft, and Microsoft after the big crash in 2000, Microsoft was down in the 20s. I think it was trading like 22, 23. Back in the early years, it was chump change. You're talking about sub $1, for
Yeah.
Microsoft. Then it built up. Then it went down. Then it built up. It's trading. I didn't check in the past couple of days, but the last I looked, it was trading around 152, 153. Granted, period of time, right? So like you said,
Right.
and dollar cost averaging your investment in that Microsoft stock over the years, and so it's a similar idea, the ups and the downs, it averages it out. But if you're in it and you just focus on my pool at this point, you've got a long time to wait. I mean, that 20, 30-year growth cycle. But man, if you were investing and investing, and now all of a sudden, 30 years later, it's $152. The digital asset space is like a rocket ship, in terms of
Yeah.
how it's moving. It's crazy. So, what is this? Tom Mullins again with another $10. With this comment's actually a question, but maybe he wasn't in the room when we were talking about it. He said, "Why is no one talking about the digital dollar in the latest Senate bill?" But actually, we started on that. We talked about it. Ended up going into some political, wrangling conversation, and Nick coined a new term, which was a
The
new
digitocracy.
yeah, right. So that the new that's going to be the new political system, digitocracy. We're gonna have to figure out the overall ins and outs of that. Put that up on Wikipedia, but um, but yeah. So man, what else?
I mean, I think we've nailed it. I think it's just important, you know, as they roll out these kind of digital solutions. I think people should expect it, but they should expect a lot more communication before these kinds of things happen. And I think this was just the shot across the bow. I think this was a way to get people talking about it, to create an open discussion. I do think these wallets will roll out, especially for the under or unbanked, sometime this year. So I do think we should expect it. We may even expect it here in a month or two, because they're done. I'm sure they're done and finished and ready to just click on. I think it'll be a question of, are they going to go traditional and send out a bunch of checks the old school way, let that be a melee, and then tell everyone, look, we can make life a lot easier with these Fed accounts.
Yeah, yeah. So, man, yeah, that's gonna be there's just so much. We're gonna have to get back on again. We have a roundtable conversation coming up on Sunday, so we might have to gear up for that. And as developments like this show up, until we get your show going here, we might have to, keep coming on. It's almost like it seems like we're gonna have to get things going pretty soon because every day now there's going to be something to talk about. you
Yeah,
know
I think we need to look at, in a few days, probably tearing apart that stimulus package and seeing how it looks, and then
yeah,
comparing it apples to apples with what the Fed's doing, so
yeah,
that
I
people
agree.
keep it in perspective. This is the stimulus package, and if I could take my arm and raise it up 200,000 feet, that would be what the Fed is doing every single day. So it's gonna be interesting to tear that apart.
That's it, exactly. So anyhow, let's wrap it up here. This was awesome. Definitely looking forward to our next chat. We'll talk more about, we'll dig a lot deeper once we actually see the stimulus package, if it actually happens tomorrow. And we'll definitely tear that up. That'll be fun. We'll see if the e-wallets are in it, out of it, wherever they are, and we'll see how that has an impact on the digital asset space and the movement and the potential separation of the digital asset space from the reliance on fiat currency and other markets. So I think that would be interesting. With that, I guess we'll check out. So we'll see you guys next time for sure. Thursday night, 10 p.m. For the deep dive with the digital nomad investor, and we'll look forward to seeing you guys then. See ya.